For decades, a shadow rested on the ocean floor, silent, invisible, and completely forgotten by the world above. No government claimed it. No naval record explained it. No family knew where to find it. It was a ghost made of steel, buried beneath hundreds of feet of dark Atlantic water, keeping its secrets with the cold patience of the deep sea. What divers eventually found inside that rusting hull would shake historians, devastate surviving families, and rewrite a chapter of World War II that the world believed was already closed. This is the story of a lost Nazi submarine, and the horrifying truth that waited inside. It began with a fisherman and a number that didn't make sense. Captain Bill Nagel had worked these Atlantic waters for years, trolling the area roughly 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. He knew every rock formation, every reef, every underwater ridge that showed up on his sonar. So when an unfamiliar shape appeared on his screen one afternoon, dense, elongated, and resting at a depth of around 230 feet, he paid close attention. It was not a reef. It was not a rock. It was something man-made, and it was large. The reading haunted him. He shared it with fellow divers in the tight-knit wreck diving community along the east coast of the United States. When the coordinates reached experienced technical diver John Chatterton and his colleague Richie Kohler, they took immediate interest. In September of 1991, a team assembled and headed out to those coordinates with one purpose: to see what was down there. What they found stopped them cold. Resting upright on the sandy ocean floor, completely intact and eerily preserved, was a World War II German U-boat. The conning tower rose from the silted deck with the quiet authority of a monument. The hull curved away into the dark water in both directions. It was enormous, and it was completely unknown to the historical record. There was no documented German submarine loss anywhere near the New Jersey coast. No Allied attack reports. No fleet records from Berlin. Nothing in the naval archives of any country mentioned this vessel. It had simply vanished from history, and now, half a century later, it had returned. Word spread quickly through the diving community. The mysterious U-boat became an obsession. Veteran divers began organizing expeditions, determined to identify the wreck and uncover whatever secrets it held below. But this was not a dive for the cautious or the underprepared. 230 feet is a depth that punishes mistakes without mercy. At that pressure, nitrogen from compressed air dissolves into the bloodstream and begins to impair the brain, a condition called nitrogen narcosis. Divers can become confused, euphoric, or dangerously overconfident without even realizing it. The proper remedy is a specialized breathing mixture called trimix, which dilutes the nitrogen with helium, keeping the diver's mind clear and sharp. Not everyone who came to this wreck was equipped with it. Among those drawn to the mystery was a father and son diving team from Pennsylvania, Steve Feldman and his experienced dive partner, along with many other skilled enthusiasts. But perhaps the most tragic example of the wreck's deadly power came in October of 1992, when two experienced divers descended to explore the submarine's interior without the recommended gas mixture. Inside the pitch-black hull, visibility deteriorated rapidly as their movements stirred up decades of accumulated silt. During the dive, heavy wreckage shifted without warning and pinned one of the divers to the floor of the control room. By the time the situation resolved and both men made their way back toward the surface, they had stayed far beyond their safe bottom time. The nitrogen that had saturated their blood during the dive demanded a slow, staged decompression on the way up, a process of pausing at specific depths to allow the gas to safely leave the body. Without those stops, the nitrogen forms bubbles inside the tissue and bloodstream. The result is decompression sickness, an agonizing and often fatal condition. That day, both divers surfaced too quickly. One died on the boat. The other was airlifted to a hyperbaric chamber. He survived briefly, barely conscious, describing hallucinations of jungles and drumbeats, the dire mind of a man whose blood had turned against him. The wreck had claimed its first victims of the modern era. It would not be its last secret, as experienced technical divers continued to explore the submarine over the following years. The interior told a story that no external view could have prepared them for. The crew had not simply drowned when the submarine sank. What the divers found inside the control room was far more disturbing than a gradual flooding. Human bones lay scattered, not gathered at stations where sailors might have made their last stand, but flung across the compartment as though thrown there by tremendous force. Skeletal remains had been wedged into steel crevices, lodged beneath twisted machinery, and pressed against bulkheads that had bent violently inward. Heavy equipment had been torn from its moorings. Control panels hung at wrong angles. Thick steel plating near the control room hatch had been pushed inward with massive, concentrated force, not outward, as would happen in a depth charge attack, but inward, suggesting something had exploded directly against the hull from a very specific point. The pattern of damage was unlike anything caused by a nearby external detonation. This was not a depth charge. This was something that had hit the submarine directly and with devastating precision. Among the debris, personal items remained largely undisturbed. Shoes, dishes, clothing fabric, the everyday objects of 60 men who had, in one instant, ceased to exist. These artifacts gave the horror a human face. These were not just naval statistics. They were people with daily routines, with habits, with lives that ended between one breath and the next. Yet despite all of this evidence, the submarine still had no name, no serial plates, no identification markings of any kind. Every number, every stamp tag, every embedded code that German naval engineers had built into the vessel as standard protocol, all of it was gone. Whether stripped by the sea over 50 years or deliberately removed before the final voyage, no one could say. The submarine remained a ghost. The breakthrough came not from sonar or military archives or the efforts of governments, but from a single kitchen knife. Deep inside one of the submarine's storage drawers, diver John Chatterton discovered a stainless steel dinner knife. On its wooden handle, a name had been carefully carved, Henneberg. It was a personal touch, the kind of small marking a sailor makes to identify his own utensil in the communal life of a submarine crew. Chatterton brought the knife to naval historians. Records confirmed that a man named Henneberg, Karl Heinrich Henneberg, had served aboard a German submarine designated U-869. But official histories created an immediate contradiction. U-869 was recorded as having been sunk near Gibraltar, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. It could not possibly be lying off the coast of New Jersey. Historians were skeptical. The knife might have been transferred with a sailor who moved between vessels, they argued. Wartime records from the chaotic final months of the conflict were incomplete. The knife was a clue, but not yet a confirmation. Chatterton and Kohler refused to accept the ambiguity. They continued diving, year after year, in dangerous conditions, pushing through silt and rusted corridors, searching for something definitive. In August of 1997, their persistence finally paid off. Inside the submarine's electric motor room, Chatterton discovered a small wooden box. Attached to it was a plastic identification tag, weathered but still readable. It read, U-869. 6 years of investigation, 2 deaths, dozens of dangerous dives, and the answer had been sitting in a box in the back of the engine room. The submarine off the coast of New Jersey was U-869, a vessel that history had buried in the wrong ocean for more than 50 years. With the identity confirmed, a more terrifying question demanded an answer. What had destroyed U-869 so completely and so silently that no one on either side of the war ever recorded it? The damage told the story. Late in World War II, Germany deployed one of its most sophisticated weapons, the T-5 Zonkenig acoustic homing torpedo. Unlike earlier torpedoes that traveled in a straight line, the T-5 was designed to listen. It tracked the underwater sound of propellers, adjusting its course autonomously to chase down its target. For Allied convoy ships, it was a nightmare weapon, one that could pursue a vessel even if the crew tried to evade. But the T-5 carried a fatal design flaw. If the torpedo missed its target or malfunctioned after launch, it did not simply lose power and sink. Instead, it continued to circle, searching for the loudest underwater sound source within range. In the open Atlantic, far from enemy ships, the loudest thing in the water was almost always the submarine that had fired it. This was not a theoretical danger. In 1944, the American submarine USS Tang was destroyed when one of its own torpedoes looped back and detonated against its own hull. Nearly the entire crew was killed in seconds. One officer survived to confirm the nightmare. naval weapons experts who studied the damage patterns aboard U-869 concluded the same thing had happened here. The concentrated, inward-facing blast near the control room was consistent with a direct torpedo impact. Not a depth charge, not an Allied attack, but U-869's own weapon returning through the dark water and finding the one target it should never have hit. The crew of U-869 had armed the weapon that destroyed them. They had pointed it at an enemy, and the sea had turned it back. The explosion did not kill everyone instantly. The watertight doors that divided the submarine's compartments held firm after the initial blast. The forward sections flooded within seconds, but in the engine room and the aft spaces, men survived the explosion. They would have felt the shockwave rattle through the hull. They would have heard the terrible sound of flooding compartments, and they would have felt the submarine begin its final, tilting descent toward the ocean floor. At 230 feet of water pressure, escape without specialized equipment is not a survivable option. Opening a hatch meant instant death. No rescue was coming. No one on the surface even knew where they were. The air in those sealed compartments could last for hours. Those men, young men, many barely in their 20s, sat in darkness, in total silence, waiting. They knew the ocean floor was rising beneath them. They knew no one was searching. They understood, in those final hours, that the sea would be their tomb. Their voices are gone. Their names were, for 50 years, attached to the wrong coordinates on a memorial thousands of miles away. Families mourned at the wrong grave. When a German documentary aired footage of the wreck, in the late 1990s, one man watched from a hospital bed with tears on his face. Herbert Gusky had been a crew member of U-869. He had been left behind before the final voyage due to illness, spared by a fever from the fate that claimed his 60 crewmates. For more than 5 decades, he had lived without knowing where his submarine had gone down, or what had happened in those final moments. He called the lost sailors his brothers. Watching footage of the wreck, seeing the control room where they had worked, seeing the knife with Henneberg's name on the handle, the man Gusky had worked alongside in the radio room, he was overcome. The discovery did not bring simple peace. It reopened wounds. It gave his grief a location, a depth, a set of coordinates. It told him where his brothers were. The story of U-869 is not simply a tale of naval history or underwater exploration. It is a story about what war buries and what the ocean keeps. 60 men died in a moment of catastrophic, accidental horror. Their own weapon turned against them. Their vessel swallowed by an ocean that kept a secret for half a century. 2 modern divers gave their lives trying to find the truth. And when that truth finally surfaced, it did not come from governments or archives. It came from a carved name on a kitchen knife. The submarine still rests there today, rusting slowly in the dark. No headstone marks the site. No official memorial names those 60 men at the correct location. The Atlantic simply continues, cold, deep, and indifferent, above the steel tomb where history buried a secret it never meant to keep.